Yeah, hi all. Uh, Welcome to another technical session of mock interviews with Ankit Jain. This is me, Ankit Jain. I'm a technical architect at an MNC. I'm Etinix certified. I'm active in Salesforce events. This is my LinkedIn URL, so you can connect with me. And I keep the details about my upcoming sessions on LinkedIn, or you can also join on WhatsApp. Like I like to take the inputs from all the people like who listen to me. So I organize various polls on the WhatsApp group, so you can respond to that. And if you want to have a one-to-one session with me, you can book my slot on topmate.io. So today the topic that we are going to discuss is around asynchronous epics. So the very first question is like, why do I need to learn asynchronous epics? Like I have not heard about synchronous epics any specifically till date. What I've only heard about is like synchronous. So what is this asynchronous? Asynchronous epics is actually like which would not execute the normal way. It would run in the back end, or it would learn in the background, I would rather say. And this asynchronous epics, why we actually go with that? Why should I learn actually about this thing? What value, like if I didn't learn, what was the problem I faced and what actually it helps me overcome? So what happens is like if you get lot of data, so like if the data is more, then you might encounter governor limits or timeout issues as well. So like if that volume or that transition is becoming too much complex, or it involves too much of data, or due to some actual business requirement, like you are not able to accomplish means have that covered in your regular you're not able to cover it in your regular limits of synchronous epics, you have to go with asynchronous epics. Like suppose like as I would say, like one example I would say is around like for querying, like for doing a query, regular query in synchronous, you can have 100 SQLs, but in asynchronous that limit is increased to twice, 200 SQL you can do. So when the data volume is becoming too much high, or you are getting too much timeout issues, this is one use case of asynchronous epics. Second is like improved user experience. Why? Like, see, as I already told you about, like, if the application is too much having too much complex logic, it would take time to execute. But I, as a user, won't want to wait for these things to happen. I don't want like to wait for a average user on an average website at least expects response and within 3 seconds that entire site should load. And whenever they click within 2 or 3 seconds, the response should be visible. So in such scenarios, like if I don't work on these things and I make everything synchronous, that will not give my users a pleasant experience. And as a normal rule, if your application is not being user friendly, or it is give poor performance, nobody would use that. They would feel like why it's kind of wasting my time. Why should I even use that? I was happy without this Salesforce itself. Like everything used to run quite smoothly. So for improved user experience as well, like we choose asynchronous epics. Third is like long running operation. Long running operation is kind of similar to like the above two. Like if you know like those things are some operations are taking too much time or are like considerable. Like taking into example, like if you have a requirement of sending a particular whatever orders that are there in your CRM or Salesforce to say other applications such as SAP, like for order processing. So these are like too much volume should be therein. So doing that through batch or through asynchronous way would be much more efficient. So these three are the main at the high level. These three are the business use cases like where we should go with asynchronous epics. Any doubts or anything on that? If anybody has any doubts, please feel free. Because concept-wise, you should be clear like why should I care about asynchronous epics? Like I behave like a small child. Like small child, they would ask you very silly questions, but you should be clear on your mind, like why we are actually going with asynchronous epics.
Jane, improved user experience means it won't. it won't make the user to wait until the process gets completed. Is it? Is it?
I will tell you an example.
Okay.
Like I had one complex requirement where what used to happen is on the button click, there would be some objects, like three or four objects were involved in, or those have to be updated. Now, what used to happen is like due to that, there was a considerable time. Say, I think it was around 10 seconds the user had to wait. Client
Okay.
told us like that is unacceptable. We want within 3 to 4 seconds. So what we did is like we moved whatever things were not impacting the user directly, we moved it to asynchronous.
Wow. Thank
For user, he doesn't care about like whether you means that operation is happening from means is able is synchronous or asynchronous. What user wants is that functionality should work. He is able to get a pleasant experience of your application. That is the only thing he would care about.
you. Okay.
He doesn't care about like your opportunity is having two triggers, four triggers, or it is having multiple automations. Due to that, for him, it is like application is taking time, and that is not a pleasant experience for him. So he won't use that. So in such
Understood.
scenarios, asynchronous would help us do those things.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, 1 second. I think I forgot to another. Yeah. So anybody else has any other question? Now shall I move ahead?
No, it's my from my side nothing.
Okay. Don't think like any no doubt is a silly doubt, or be very much clear like if conceptual, like even if it is a very silly doubt thing, doesn't really matter. What matters is like that whatever you have in your mind is crystal clear, because concepts are very important. If your concept is wrong, then entire stuff would get wrong.
Okay.
Are you good, Ritesh and Vishnu?
Yeah, Ankit.
Okay. So the next is like what has Salesforce in store for asynchronous epics? See, Salesforce over the time has added tremendous features for asynchronous doing asynchronous operations. The very basic, like which we use more oftenly, it's around the future methods. Then we had the batch class. Then we had a scheduled class, or and the last one is around queueable. These are, I would say, I would categorize those like these as the feature of asynchronous epics because each has their own use case, which solves a different problem for each of them. We'll go over those one by one. First is future method. So future method is like very basic. Like what I do is like I just make a method as at the rate future and just run it. So in the background, it would run at its own pace whenever the Salesforce has resources, and it's fine. But what is the actual benefit I get? Actual benefit I get is like it's very simple to implement. I have to just create a method at the rate future and I'm done. Then the second is like my query limits, like SQL limits are a bit higher. I'm able to get more heap size. Heap size basically is like you're storing too much variables. The data is means your variables are having too much of data. So due to that, the heap size gets increased. The third problem that has is like on DML operations. Like what happens is will go over like setup and non-setup objects. If suppose I try to do it in the same operation, it causes me error. Or in the trigger, if I have to do a call out, then future methods help me escape from that. We'll go over like the setup, non-setup in the next slide, where I will be explaining them in greater detail. Then, so these are like your three business use cases of your future method. First, like long running method. So you want to have it executed and means at a later juncture, you want to have some delay. Second, you want to do a call out. For call out, I mean like through trigger, when in trigger, you can't do a call out. So future method, you can call a future method from your trigger and then you can do the call outs. Third is your mixed DML. You have to overcome that error. Actually, you should ask me a question. If you're like quite attentive, you should have a question. You have any question on so far?
Ankit, can you give me some use case related in the real estate business where we can use future method?
Uh,
Future. Yeah. Okay. Next. You wanted to
yeah.
say something? Yeah.
Yes, Sanket. Actually, like through trigger, we can't make callouts, right? You're
Correct.
saying, like, actually, I mean, like, I came across one use case actually, like, whenever data is, whenever DML operation is happened in Salesforce, I want to send the data into another system. Okay,
Okay.
so what I did here is like, I sent all the IDs of the records into the method. In that method, we have called using a thread future, we send the data to the other system. So is that mean calling the like making a call outs through triggers, isn't it?
Uh, I would say yes and no both. Because ideally the trigger point is from like when your record is being inserted or you're doing an update. Either of those scenarios. But what happens is like future method is actually makes your transaction entire different. Like it would be an entire new thread that was be have means this operation would be happening in, which would be different from your regular thread or a regular transaction. So in theory, you will feel like means you're triggering it at the same time, like you're calling a future method like synchronously, but that entire call out and everything would be happening asynchronous, which would be separate from your regular transaction.
Yes, yes, yeah. But theoretically, we are saying that we can't call the future method. I mean, like,
We can't do a
uh,
call out because it's what we are
okay,
saying is like it like until the user should be blocked until that call out is done. So it is not happening because he is free from like when the transaction is happening because that entire transaction is being asynchronously and it is separate coming out as a separate thread. So that's the reason like I would say like it's like a if you look at the debug logs as well, you will notice like there would be an entire new thread that is entire new debug log is created for your future method.
okay,
And talking about like future method, the use cases for real estate business. So real estate business is like I would say like mostly like if you have large amount of volume or what you can say like for normal use cases like I talked about like the mixed HTML exception, future method might be a good use case for that. Other than that, what I see is like although like we can like to do API calls like immediately like how you we Abdul mentioned the use case, we
Sure.
can use that, but still I would not prefer future method to do that. What I would want is like I have the future method but I call it using my queueable, because you will be at least able to track like what happened, like whether the transaction was successful not successful. I would be able to know.
okay. Like, I mean, in my case, like, if the transaction is successful or not, that they, I mean, like, like
That
we are saving it, we are
you're
saving it
the
in
yeah
object form.
yeah what you're actually doing would be doing is like after like you would had passed the IDs means I believe it would be after insert, right?
Yes, yes, after, yeah.
After insert then you're querying that data back in the future method and then sending those data.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's fine. But a better approach would be like you using the Queueable would be a much better use case. Like you would be at least able to know like which records are made successful, not successful,
Okay, okay,
because you are not able to track right now. Like that future method fails, you won't have that. Also, the error logging would be quite difficult for you.
no, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So these are the three use cases. Like if anybody asks you, like in interview, like what is the why you use future method? Like why you have the queueable, batchable, everything. Like still why people use future method. You can say like the simple reason like people use future method is like the less effort to implement that. Because for future method, I have to just create a future means I have to just create a new method and tag it at the future. I don't have to worry about anything else. And as developers, like few means we don't realize the need for tracking like what is happening to a future method, because we think like it would future method would execute at its pace, but we won't be able to track it, like whether it's in the queue, after how much time it would get executed, nothing.
Uh,
But
yes,
yeah,
Sanket. Like as you mentioned, like queueable is preferable, but then when we are going to use a call out into external web services using feature method.
future method, like see, ideally like you should be tracking like the IDs, but if suppose you don't want to do it for some reason, you can go with future method because it is quick to implement. Because you would be like for testing that out, or creating test classes as well, you won't be needing to create another class and doing all of that. For Queueable, you'll have to create a separate class which should implement the Queueable. You have to implement the execute method. Then you should have another method which should be having the logic of your asynchronous, which should be running asynchronously. Then you will be calling that in your execute method. Then you will have to again call that Queueable from system.enqueue method. So it's a lot of code that you have to write.
No.
I will show you like what all code you might need to write if you have to write Queueable. But from practical aspects, like Queueable should be mostly preferred over future method.
No. Got
People are actually lazy to implement write all of those code. So that's why they prefer like future method is the best solution.
it. Okay.
So now a
Understood.
simple example of future method, I think we have that. Yeah, I was talking about the setup and non-setup objects, like where we were talking about like TML exception. So I thought like I'll keep a sample slide on the setup and non-setup objects as well. So setup objects, like what is related to system administration related stuff. So those things like your user profile, public group, role, permission set. These all I would say are setup objects.
Like how can we recognize that setup objects?
There's a list that is provided by Salesforce. I can go over that list 1 second. I can give you a URL of that.
Like just by saying it, how can't we able to recognize it?
There's a long list of setup objects. Like this is the list Salesforce has.
No.
If you want, I can ping you this list.
Yeah.
And now from the very common sense, like non-setup are like which are not in your list of that setup, like your custom objects, standard objects. These are all your non-setup objects. Now, let the simple example of future method. Like you can have a regular class, you can tag it as the future callout equal to true. Important, you can only pass the primitive data types or you can pass list of IDs. It doesn't mean like you can't have a future method without any parameter. You can have. Let's
Sorry.
go to an org,
Somebody?
and because that has to be made very much clear. Otherwise, people would think like without parameters I can't have. I can create another future method. Okay, I can have an empty. Yeah, yeah, it's saved. So you can have a no parameters future method without this as well. And definitely you can pass in your regular parameters as well. What are the primitive data types in your list of IDs? Like list of IDs example is already there in front of you. Here is another interview question actually. Like why it does not Salesforce does not allow you to pass objects in your future method. So what Salesforce to answer that, what Salesforce thinks is like it might happen like when you called the future method, the state of the object was different. And by that time, like when Salesforce got the resources, that time the state of those objects would have changed. So due to that, Salesforce might have like its database might become inconsistent. So it does not allow you to pass objects as parameter. Instead, it says like you pass the IDs, retrieve it, and then process whatever you want.
Could you elaborate with an example, if possible?
1 minute. Let me just see. I think I should have an example. Yeah. If suppose this is an example, like what Salesforce says is like you should have 1 minute. Let me just, yeah. So assume like I have this class test future. Okay. No, I have, this is a method. Like assume like there's a method already in place, and then I have a normal method. This is a synchronous method since it does not have at that future. Then, as you said, like if I have a no means I if I it allowed me to pass objects as parameter, the signature would look like this, and I would be passing the record of contact record as this. Okay.
Okay.
So what would have happened is like here, what Salesforce would do is like after inserting this contact, you're calling a future method. So it would just call this future method, then it would skip this implement the definition part and directly would delete that contact. Now what happened in the meantime? In the meantime, your future method got executed. It noticed like this object does not exist now. So the entire data would get inconsistent now. Now suppose if you would, if suppose the scenario will be it, like you are iterating over those contacts and then you are making a further updates on this contact, then it would be entire inconsistency. Yes or no?
Yes.
So that's the reason what Salesforce says is no, I can't allow you. So that's where the right example is like you pass the IDs and then process the things accordingly.
So the control won't get stopped at sixth line, right?
Yeah, control what it would do is it would call this method execute a second thread
Okay.
and then it would proceed to the next line.
So what would if he pass IDs, and if he pass IDs also, like there is no meaning, right? Like we are deleting the
No,
contact here. See.
no, because IDs you would have like you will be able to retrieve the records. Like Salesforce would be able to get those instances at least. Because right now, like what's the correct instance, it would know. But now in the above example, it doesn't know. It just has the context of whatever was passed. It doesn't know what happened it in the back behind the scene. So that is the problem. Now the next is Queueable. So Queueable came into the picture to avoid few of the things that limitation with sales future method had. So there were three limitations. First, I was not able to track like when that future method would get executed. First problem it had. Second, I was not able to pass objects as a parameter or complex data types because I was able to either pass list of IDs or I was able to pass primitive data types. So Cable helped me avoid this. The third problem it had is like I can't call a future method from future method. I can't change future methods. So these three major problems Queueable solved it for us. Is it clear? We'll go over the code, no worries.
Oh, why can't we call future method in future method? Thank you.
See, because we don't have the any mechanism to track like the first one gets executed. The very
Okay.
problem is like I don't know when that first means the internal stack like If suppose I call this future method, okay? Now I don't know this context does not know when that this future method is over. There is no callback. Like I don't know when it would get got executed. So how would it know? Like it has to call another method. Suppose there is another future method. Like I have to call suppose future nested method. So but where will I write this? Because I don't know when this would get executed. So that's why like you can't actually nest anything future from future because itself it's like it is dependent upon when the resources would get executed. So say what Salesforce says is like you can't do that. There's no tracking as well available like for Salesforce to know like this future method is executed or not. The core problem lies there itself. In Queueable, at least I'm able to track like that future method has executed. But in future method, I'm not able to track. So for this limitation, it's not available. Like you can't call a one future to future. Actually, that is an interview question too.
Yeah, I saw your videos. Yeah.
So now we'll go over the code for Queueable class. So we have Queueable implemented. Yeah. So this is Queueable, like where we have the execute method. We have the Queueable context, and here we can have like whatever logic we want to perform. Here, either you can have a normal method and call it, or you can call directly another feature method that you have. I can call a feature method here as well. To just give an example, I am just and also I want to avoid the like thought process like you can't have a feature method in Queueable, you can have only your regular methods. You can call it. Okay, sorry, start. So see, this is a Queueable, and inside Queueable, I am able to call the feature method. Even batch class I can call. Yeah, one more thing like I would like to like call it out as database. Earlier, what used to be database.execute batch. Now it's kind of mandatory to pass write it as system.database.execute batch. Otherwise, it would throw an error. See, I can call queueable, I can call batchable from my queueable. Okay. So in queueable, what you have to do is like you have to override the execute method and then you can call whatever you have. Are the things clear? Or is it going too much above your head? Can someone acknowledge, please?
Yes, good, Ankit.
Okay. The practical use case, like what means? see, everything is good, like you are able to track it every, and but still there's one problem. Like with batch class, like when it executes, I'm able to know like that finish method is getting called. I want to whatever I want to do after that batch class has been called, I'm able to do. But for Queueable, I was not able to do anything until few releases back, where it introduced another important feature called Finalizer. So Finalizer actually, if you suppose like you had the like in the exception handling, you had the finally method block which used to get executed every time. Salesforce introduced finalizers. So what you can do is like in your finalizers, you can do whatever error logging that needs to be done. Or like similarly, like in the batch class, like what you used to do is like what records are passed, what are failed. You used to send an email to the specific users. Same thing you can do now with the Queueable as well. Also, earlier I had to do a query on Apex, async Apex job to check like whether that Queueable has executed or not. But now directly have a callback. Is it clear? Because it's an advanced concept. Not many people know about this feature. Are you able to follow, or shall I go in more details, or you have a further question? Please feel free to ask any question. It might sound like it's like very basic, but doesn't really matter.
Transaction finalizer will give something, right?
You can consider it as an equivalent of your finish method of your data batch class. You can consider kind of that. When everything would is completed, uh, then it would get executed. But one thing is important here, like for batch class, automatically by default the finish method was called. But here you have to attach that finalizer to your queueable. Like if you
So
notice
it's
this,
okay. So it's not mandatory to execute, right? Like to write.
yeah, it's not mandatory. But you get an advantage because you're able to do error logging and much complex type of complexity you're able to avoid. Even you can control the sequencing as well. I would say using this. If I know like after execute first queueable has executed, then I have to call another queueable. I know when that has happened. I don't have to do a polling and check like if that has executed or not. You consider it like your JavaScript promises like dot, then you're able to get off when that queueable method has queueable is executed. So now what you know when those things have happened, and accordingly you can write your next set of code to have the full control over yourself. So this is the advanced concept, but highly useful, highly underrated. People don't know like what is the power that it gave you. But if you ask you to a senior technical folks or senior principal architects, they will make you realize that it is a very important concept, like which it was missing out.
We'll go through. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Next is your batch class. Batch class, batch means it's like a large data volume. The name itself says. So why we go with batch class? So simple reason being like the data is too much large or it is long time taking. Or second is like you need higher query limits. Like in your regular database, after 50,000 records, you're not able to do a query. But with batch class, you can query up to 50 million records. Uh, Although there is one exception to whatever I'm saying in is at the rate read only, which allows you to query 1 lakh records. But that is a very specific case. But other than that, you want a larger limit for querying, you have to go with batch class. So I will show a batch class actually. Instead of showing you theory, I thought like I would go over the code and then explain it, the stuff, which would make it much more engaging. Yeah. So this is your batch class. So batch class, like you have to implement the batchable. Then you have the start method. Here, start, there's another interview question. What are different variants of start your batch class? So you will have to tell them like, see, the batch class is one only, but the start method has two variants. One is your database.query locator, and other is your iterable. So in query locator, we don't have the data with us. We have to query that data. So this is the main brain around your handling the limit, like querying more than 50,000 records. Because it does the splitting itself and then gives you the result. And then after each result, you're able to, this execute method gets called multiple times. And here, whatever you need, you perform that logic. If someone asks how many times like each method executes, tell them like start method would get executed once, execute method would get executed based on what is the batch size. Another I would like to talk all about like one example which could be a tricky in your interviews. They might say like there are 2000 records, okay, and you're running the batch class. So how many times that batch class would execute? Don't just say like it is like 10. Ask them what is the batch size that you are passing in as the parameter. Based on that, it would divide, and accordingly, those many instances would get created, or that execute method would get called. Don't
Okay.
assume like it would be always 200. Although we know like default it is 200, but still ask the panel like what are you passing as the parameter, or you are not passing any parameter. Ask this question, because many people I have noticed are not asking that question. So it is an open-ended. Try to make your answers like closed-ended. Like you define like what is the assumption. You tell like you want to get the additional requirement, like what is the specific thing that they are looking for, and then answer. Otherwise, this could be a problem. So always ask and then give the answer.
Okay, Ankit, yeah. Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah, Ankit, can you elaborate when to use database dot query locator and database dot iterable with an
iterable.
use, yeah,
Yeah,
with an
yeah.
use case.
Use case.
Yeah.
See, in most of the use cases that you would come across would be like querying the data.
Yeah.
If suppose you have to do some file processing or you already have the data with you,
Yeah.
if you have the data, you want to perform just file processing related stuff, the recommendation is to go with iterable.
But we can do that processing in execute method as well, right?
See, otherwise what would happen is like you would have to again query the data, again get those records, again process it. But with iterable, like what do you normally do? Let me see like if I have an example for that. Let's see, give me 1 second. So this is an example of like passing the things as a iterable. Like for iterable, this is an example. Although not the best example, like the simple use case is like I already had the accounts query with me. So what I did is I passed it as a parameter and then I'm just returning this. Now what would happen, whatever accounts are, then it would automatically divide it into chunks as per whatever chunk size I have passed in as a parameter, and then that logic would execute. So these are the two variants of your batch class. One is with the iterable, and another one is your database.query locator. So I call out here. So these are the two variants that you have of the batch class. Another part, like this, doing a call out through batch is also a part of your batch data synchronization integration pattern, which says like if you want to have a large amount of data that has to be passed from Salesforce to another system, You either go with the batch class with allow callouts, or the best solution is around the middleware. So this is the thing around your batch class. So we went over the batch class, what it is. We saw the code in action. Now the next part is around scheduled epics. So scheduled epics is like if you want to schedule a class, you use that. So, and one more thing, like it's like many people have the misconception like it is used only with batch class. No, you can have a queueable as well with schedulable. Like this is the scheduled epics. Now this one is actually, I think, a future method, I guess. Yeah. So I can schedule future methods as well. I can schedule anything pretty much. It's not necessary like I always use schedulable with batch class only. So I wanted to avoid this misconception. So this is your scheduled epics. So with that, like any questions so far?
No, Ankit.
I hope everything you're able to follow. Or
Yes.
any interview question you want to ask related to this stuff, you can ask.
Ankit, what about that interface called Raises Platform Events?
Raises platform events.
Yeah,
Yeah, that actually what it would do is around like it would create a, platform event.
yeah. But I think I know the use case called whenever we implement a batch and whenever the batch fails or error occurs in the batch.
That
Uh,
actually happens. Yeah, I know
yeah,
that. So I will tell you, there's actually a very good thing that you brought it up. Let me go to that. See, what typically happens is, if you have a block, like where you have a try catch block, and suppose due to some normal reason, the exception happens. It goes into the catch block and you're able to log the error. But suppose it is an unhandled exception, like suppose you get 101 error. Will your code in the catch block get executed? No, because Salesforce can't handle that exception. So in such scenarios, what is recommended is like you have a platform event that is done. Means that you publish, and then you have a code like or your flow to get to create your log records based on that platform event. For batch classes, Salesforce has given a platform event specifically for that. Batch error async something like that. Yeah, batch apex error event. So if we get any error, then this event gets fired. So the recommendation is to have the platform event means platform event flow on this platform event, and then you log the errors.
can we use that with another async like batch or schedule or queueable?
This platform event, you can have your own platform event, but this one is like native by Salesforce.
Okay.
So
And
your
is the finalizers we can use that in any batch remaining asynchronous
no. This is highly specific to Queueable. Because for batch class, you already have your finish method. For future method, you can't know like when that method would execute it, so you can't have it. For queueable, this was missing, so they added this finalizer.
Okay.
So with
Wow.
that,
Like database dot stateful, Ankit. Like I hear that.
database dot execute, no, database dot stateful. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that. See, what happens is like by default, your batch classes are means are stateless. By stateless, it means like it. Let me just open the code once. Otherwise, I don't get comfortable like without the code and talking about this stuff. Yeah. So what happens is like by default it is stateless. Stateless, it means like once this block is executed, like this execute method is executed, the next time it gets executed. Like suppose like like execute method gets called multiple times during a batch. We only call this batch based on your batch size. Whatever you pass, it would divide it into various chunks, and depending upon that, multiple times the execute method happens. I want to know like what were records that were processed successfully in the first transaction or the first time the execute method was executed, and then you have to also check like what are the second in the second transaction or the second execution of execute method, what records were failed. I am not able to trace that by default. Why? Because it's an stateless. It's not capturing what has happened previously. Well, everything it treats as a new and just keeps on processing. But suppose if I want to send an email to a person, like suppose for normal use cases, what business case I have is, suppose there are say 100 records that or 1 lakh records I had to process those. Like the manager wants to know like how many records are there which have been sent successfully, which are there which have not been successful. So I would need to have a complete number. For that, I will have to implement database.stateful, and then I have to create a variables here at the top, and then add like into those lists like which have been successfully processed and which have not been. And accordingly, the finish method I can have a means I can use those variables and then I can send an email accordingly. So this is around your database.stateful.
But if any error occurs, it will handle and it will give back to us, right? That's it.
Uh, if it is matlab means if you have it like a handled exception, unhandled exception, you can't do anything about that.
Basically, we need to create a try catch block, and try catch. We can increment the variable which we created, which are successful, and in catch block, if any error occurs, we can increment the variable which
Yeah,
shows the
correct.
count of the
That would
error.
give you just the count. But
Oh,
in
yeah.
normal use cases, what people prefer is like which record has been failed. You give that record ID in that CS. You actually create a CSV file,
Okay, fine.
format it well, like what are the records, what are the details, so you know like what condition the records are filling in, so the investigation can be done. So it's kind of that kind of a use case.
Okay.
Okay.
So with that, any final questions, and then we are good to close. Any final questions?
Oh, nothing more. I think, I mean,
Nothing.
like, it would be great if you take more realistic questions. Like, I mean, like for us,
Yeah, sure. Like in future, like more use cases. Actually, the time constraint was also there. Like it was ideally planned for 45 minutes. We went it over an hour because I wanted to stress more on few of the things. So it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, then I am stopping the recording now.